With just 4 games left in what's been a disappointing season for the New York Giants, we reflect on a wasted year and an uncertain future with special guest Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And on today's show, I'm pleased to welcome in good friend Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. And we're going to talk about a lost Giants season, a long Giants season, an exhausting Giants season. We'll talk about, we'll reflect on what's gone wrong. We'll talk about Schoen and Daboll. Should they be back? And if so, why? We'll talk about other changes and things that we could maybe be optimistic about moving forward. So, Ed, welcome on in, my friend.
Oh, thanks for having me, Patty. Are we having fun yet?
I don't know. Are we?
I don't know. We'll see. 4 more games, and then maybe we can have some fun.
Maybe. But well, we always have fun, though, when we do a show together. So
sure we do. I don't know if anybody has fun listening to us, but we have fun doing this.
Exactly. All right. And let's talk about this season that has gone so horribly off the rails. I mean, if you have to go back and look at whether it be a decision that they made or didn't make, where do you think things just kind of started to really go off the rails for this team?
Oh, Patty, you can make the argument, Patty, that it's all about quarterback. You can make the argument that it's all about quarterback because you can sit here and we can argue about offensive line decisions and we can argue about defensive line decisions and all of those things are true and in-game decisions like what happened in week 2 with Graham Gano, with the roster management and all of that. But if the Giants had gotten better quarterback play, both before they waived Daniel Jones and after, we wouldn't be talking about any of this. Because they'd probably have 5 wins, 6 wins, and John Merrick would be able to look at this and say, to this point, we've seen the progress I was looking for. So for me, and like I said, there's a host of things and a host of decisions that went wrong, but they banked on Daniel Jones being at least as good as he was in 2022, or that's what they crossed their fingers and hoped for. Because of the way things worked out, and it obviously just didn't happen. So for me, that's the big thing.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, look, we heard at the end of last year how Daniel Jones is going to be our starter once he's healthy. And yet we saw Hard Knocks confirmed it. They were looking to move on from him regardless if he was going to be healthy or not. Because as I have said so many times, you don't look to trade premium assets if you are sure that you have your guy, regardless if he's injured or not. And I just thought that was very telling.
Absolutely, Patty. They knew before this season that they had to move on. And we debated whether or not they made the right choice. And we'll still be debating whether or not they made the right choice by not drafting a quarterback. We'll be debating that choice for the next couple of years, to be honest with you, because this has turned into a lost season because they hoped to get adequate play out of Jones. They didn't get it. As Jones was their bridge quarterback this year. He basically was their bridge guy to what they knew would be a Daniel Jones-less future. And it just, it didn't work. But what it comes down to is, were they right to draft Malik Neighbors instead of JJ McCarthy, which is the guy they would have probably taken at that spot if they had taken a quarterback? Yeah, and that decision comes down to whether they get it right this year, in the upcoming draft, or the one after that. So it's going to be a while before we know.
Yeah. And of course that's no consolation to the fans who are angry, who are, we saw the plane over at MetLife Stadium. Just really a season gone off the rails. But Ed, let's also talk about the defense because, look, we could sit here and say it was the quarterback play, but I don't think it's totally fair to put it all on Daniel Jones. I don't think, I mean, he was a part of the problem, but is he
Sure.
the only problem? No. You could probably look at the defense. You could probably look at some of the coaching decisions that were made. I mean, what elements do you think you can also pull from that group as being a reason for this season having gone so far off the rails?
Oh, Patty, I think you go back to, and it's a lot of the same stuff that we've talked about for a long time. I thought Joe Schoen did a nice job in the offseason adding veteran pieces to the offensive line. The problem is that, and you can't solve every problem in one offseason. You just can't. There's a limited amount of resources. But the Giants went into this season and their starting offensive line was fine. And had they been able to keep that group together, it would still be fine. But they went into this season with the same failed backup offensive tackle plan that they had a year ago. And that failed again. I mean, they had to sign Chris Hubbard, who's a 12-year veteran right tackle, to try to play left tackle, which that was going to be a disaster. As soon as we saw it, we knew that was a disaster anyway, but they neglected that after seeing the results of what they tried a year ago. They doubled down and tried that again. I have said for forever now, I was fine with trading away Leonard Williams. As good a season as Leonard Williams is having, that's all well and good. But I'd rather cut bait on Leonard Williams and not pay him $64 million like the Seahawks are, get the second round pick. They turned Leonard Williams into Brian Burns, which is fine. A guy 4 years younger, really good player. The problem is they lost Leonard Williams. They lost A'Shawn Robinson in free agency. And they replaced two quality defensive linemen with undrafted free agent Elijah Chapman. The most resources, the highest draft pick Joe's ever used on the defensive line is a 5th round pick. And that's just not good enough. I mean, how predictable was it that this run defense was going to be atrocious? So you look at the treatment of both lines. Patty, I've said for years, you build your team from inside out. And I think Joe's made mistakes drafting offensive linemen. He made mistakes in not putting enough resources into the defensive line. And largely, I think a lot of that is showing up now and being 2-11.
Ed, what about a hot topic that I know exists amongst Giant fans, and that was the decision to move on from Saquon Barkley, move on from Xavier McKinney, two young guys who, were still pretty much in their prime. There was no way Joe Schoen was going to pay $17 million a year for Xavier McKinney. And you can make the argument that, they replaced him with Tyler Nubin, who's a young and up and coming safety and who's on a rookie contract, a lot cheaper. But Saquon, as far as the offense goes, he was the offense. And without him in the lineup this year, the Giants offense has just not been what I think they were looking for, despite the addition of Malik Neighbors. So what are your thoughts there? In retrospect, did they make a mistake not bringing back Saquon?
Patty, I still think I did a piece a couple of weeks ago, looking at a lot of those decisions that Joe made on an individual basis. And if you just look at Saquon in a vacuum, if you look at that decision just by itself, I still don't have a big problem with it. Philosophically, running back, looking for big money, 27, 28 years old, long injury history. I get it. Okay. They replaced him. Tyrone Tracy is showing. I mean, he's not putting up Saquon numbers, obviously, but when the Giants are playing in games where it's actually close enough that they can hand him the ball 15 times, and he's a good player. He's a good young player, rookie contract, same kind of thing that you mentioned with Tyler Nubin. Philosophically, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with moving on, as I said, from Leonard Williams. I don't have a problem necessarily moving on from Xavier McKinney. The problem comes, Patty, when you look at the accumulation of McKinney, Barkley, Julian Love, Leonard Williams. You go on down the line. There's a couple more guys probably that escape me at the moment. But what has happened, it's not just the talent drain. It's the leadership drain. It's the veteran core. John Mara used to talk about this even back when they hired Joe Judge. He used to talk about what we don't have here is a veteran core of guys that we drafted, guys that we've got on second contracts, guys who are our quote unquote culture builders, who can lead these young guys. You've got Andrew Thomas, you've got Dexter Lawrence, and what else do you have? Not a whole lot. And for me, it's the accumulation not only of talent but of leadership and of those second contract guys who were giants. And I think, like I said, if you take those individually, I can defend each one. As an accumulation, the problem is all that leadership and not to mention the talent that you let go.
All right. So coming up next, we're going to take a look at Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll. Should they be back? And if so, why? You're listening to Locked On Giants with Patricia Traina and special guest Ed Valentine. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans. Today's episode is sponsored in part by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments. With over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program, the possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. Start earning points on your rent that you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. Again, that's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnfl. Make sure you use our link so that they know that we sent you. Again, joinbuilt, joinbilt.com/lockedonnfl. Don't wait. Start earning your rewards today. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm Patricia Traina, your host. He is Ed Valentine, a Big Blue View, my special guest and good friend and nemesis in the press box, but in a good way. We're always jabbing each other, so it's a comedy show. You think we're funny on the air here? You haven't seen anything, folks. But anyway,
I would quickly, Patty. I have to say that it made me, what happened on Sunday made me laugh. If I can tell that story real quickly, we get to the press box and we are always seated next to each other. Well, there was a reporter seated in between us on Sunday. And as soon as he saw that he was seated in between us, he said, Ed, would you like to switch seats with me, basically? Because I know you're going to talk to Patty the whole game.
yeah, we got communication, I guess. But
So we switched seats.
yep, it's all good. I mean, I
Yeah.
couldn't believe they broke us up. I mean, gosh.
Terrible.
But
Terrible.
anyway, so Ed, let's continue on. Obviously, the hot topic now amongst Giant fans is should Brian Daboll be back? Should Joe Schoen be back? And why? And a lot of fans are just, they want to tear it down, start all over again. Let's start with Joe Schoen. Where do you stand on that? And does it make sense to keep the continuity, even though the stability, if you will, right now is not really, what I think anybody would want it to be?
No, it's not, Patty, but I I made this case a week or two ago. I made the case for keeping both Joe and Brian Daboll. Um, at this point, I think I'm more sold on the idea of keeping Joe Schoen. Look, the Giants organization was a complete and total mess when Joe took over. It was broken. Um, I will be the first one to admit that Joe has made mistakes. I think that Joe knows Joe has made mistakes. I think, but I also think that he's a young general manager still. He's in his first time doing this job where he's sitting in that chair. I think all of us can look at it and think, the first time we did any job, maybe it took us a while to really figure it out. I think that you can point to when I did this story a few weeks ago, I pointed to George Young. How many years was it? And I know that it's a different era with free agency and all of that, but it took George Young 5 years to turn the Giants into a playoff team. Ty Dunn of the subscription site golong.com did a piece recently, and he mentioned a couple of other GMs who have in recent years struggled in their first 2 or 3 seasons until they found the right head coach. Nick Caserio in Houston is one who comes to mind. I think in Nick Caserio's first 2 seasons in Houston, that team won 6 games. Then he finds DeMeco Ryans as head coach. He stumbles into the first overall pick or second overall pick, gets CJ Stroud, gets Will Anderson to build his defense around, and things look a lot different. Les Snead with the Los Angeles Rams didn't have a winning season for the first 5 years of his tenure as GM in Los Angeles, and all of a sudden he hires Sean McVay, and things look a lot different with the Rams now. I don't necessarily think that moving on from Joe Schoen is going to change anything. I think Joe has built a solid organization, a solid scouting staff. I think the 2024 draft is something he can kind of hang his hat on. I would understand, I guess, if John Mara says we've got to blow the whole thing up. I think the hard thing to do here is to have patience. The hard thing for John to do is to have patience, but at least with Joe, because when you start over with a GM, Patty, you're not only starting over with a GM, you're blowing up the entire coaching staff. You're blowing up the entire roster. You're blowing up the front office. You're changing the scouting staff, and you're looking at a 3 or 4 year process before you have this right. So, and I still think Joe can get it right.
Yeah, and to your point, you've got guys right now who are in their prime, Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, Brian Burns. You don't want to waste 3, 4 years starting over from scratch with those guys.
There is something to build with here. It's not the Giants are 2-11, but I think this roster, when it's whole, and we can talk about injuries and all of that, this roster, when it's whole, is better to me, and I know I've used the Bill Parcells, you are what your record says you are, and they deserve to be 2-11. But this roster, when it's whole, shouldn't be 2-11. It just shouldn't.
I agree. Now let's talk about Brian Daboll because I think, and I've been saying this for a while now, that Daboll is probably not on as solid ground as Joe is. That being said, the Giants have played, I think it's 8 close games and they're 1-7, which shows that the team isn't quitting on him. Now, if you bring Daboll back, I think if you're John Mara, Steve Tisch, you'd say to him, Brian, we'll bring you back, but you got to make some changes because there are things that Daboll is doing that just hasn't worked out. And you and I have talked about some of these things, starting with how he doles out preseason game snaps as though this team were their, excuse me, the Kansas City Chiefs, that they don't need the preseason work. The play calling, you can make an argument that that hasn't really worked out. Even though the intention was good, you can make the argument that some of his play calling and game planning has been a head scratcher. You can make the argument that maybe the hiring of Shane Bowen as defensive coordinator in retrospect wasn't the right fit for the personnel they already had. And I'm sure you can, point to other things, the processes that Daboll keeps talking about that keep yielding the same results. So where do you stand on Daboll? Would you bring him back and say, hey, Brian, you got to make some changes? Or would you just say at this point, look, it's not working. The team's getting worse and worse and worse under your watch. We're going to go in a different direction.
Well, 2 weeks ago when I did the making the case piece, I said bring both guys back. But look, you're 100% right. Daboll is on much shakier ground than Joe Schoen, at least in my view. And you hit all the right points. The hiring of Shane Bowen and look, let's not blame the defense for what's going on this year. Yes, we can look at the run defense hasn't been good. Yes, we can point to the lack of interceptions and, going 11 and a half games without an interception and all of that. But the bottom line numbers for the defense are mediocre. Okay. Maybe the defense isn't as good as it was a year ago, but the bottom line is the defense is mediocre. If I think it'll probably happen this way, but I feel bad if Daboll comes back and Shane Bowen is made the fall guy, for a team that where the biggest problem has been the offense that's run by Brian Daboll. So yes, maybe Shane Bowen wasn't the right hire, but should Bowen be the fall guy for this? I'm not so sure that's the right way to look at it, because the offense is the big problem. But and that's Daboll's thing. You and I both agreed, Patty. I think Daboll did the right thing this year in taking over the play calling, simply because the offense was going backwards. This was such a critical year for Daniel Jones. It theoretically has been Daboll's strength, but it's not working. It's not working. And to me, it's been a huge hit to Brian Daboll's reputation, as some sort of offensive guru. You look around the league and you see what Kevin Stefanski's doing with Jameis Winston, and you see what Kevin O'Connell is doing with Sam Darnold, and you look around the league at some of these other quote unquote offensive gurus, and you think, Brian Daboll's kind of getting left in the dust here. And so, but like I said, you hit all the salient points, and what I wrote the other day, Patty, was do John Mara and Steve Tisch look at this and say, is the fact that the Giants are still giving effort, that they're still competing, that they're still playing hard, is that enough to overcome the results and all of these other things that we're seeing with Daboll that are questionable and might be leading to some of these losses? And I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that's going to be.
All right. So that being said, assuming that Daboll is brought back, do you have confidence in Daboll and Shane pick the next franchise quarterback, knowing that, look, it's going to buy Daboll at least a year, maybe 2, if they do go ahead and draft a rookie quarterback, but also knowing that, if if it doesn't work out, you're going to have to change the coach again in a couple of years anyway. And how's that going to affect the quarterback situation?
That's another hard question, Patty, but I keep coming back to what we saw on Hard Knocks. All right. We don't know what kind of quarterback JJ McCarthy's going to be because he missed the whole year with an injury. Michael Penix hasn't gotten to play. We've seen Bo Nix surpass everybody's expectations in Denver. And a lot of Giants fans will ask me now, why didn't the Giants draft Bo Nix? Well, there's 32 teams in the NFL. There's one team in the league that thought Bo Nix was a first-round draft pick, and that's the Denver Broncos, and that's where he landed. He landed in the perfect situation with the perfect head coach. I have no idea if Bo Nix would have succeeded with the New York Giants. But if what I always say is, look, if you don't love the guy, if you don't believe in the guy, it's not going to work, or you're at least lessening your chances that it's going to work, unless you feel really, really good about it, right from the beginning. So I don't know if that would have worked in New York. It probably wouldn't have if they were drafting Nix just to draft him. But what I know, going all the way back to Hard Knocks, is Brian Daboll was all over Jaden Daniels. Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen were all over Drake May. We didn't hear them say a word about Caleb Williams, maybe because they knew they couldn't get Caleb Williams. But the two best quarterbacks in this draft, arguably, to me, the guys with the highest ceilings, are Jaden Daniels and Drake May. And the Giants identified both of those guys and were all over those guys. They had no shot at Daniels. They made a run at getting Drake May, at getting that pick out from the Patriots, and couldn't get it done. So I think that they can identify a quarterback. I think they can. Can they surround him with the right talent? Can they surround him with the right quarterback coach, and all of that remains to be seen. I think, Daboll's a guy who's done it before, with Josh Allen. And he's worked with quarterbacks his whole career. So, so I think he can. I feel like they can identify the right quarterback, and then we just have to see where it goes and see if it works.
Coming up next, we're going to wrap things up with other changes that maybe the Giants need to think about making besides the head coach, besides the GM, besides the quarterback. We'll wrap all that up right after this with Ed Valentine of Big Blue. Hey, Locked On Giant fans, if you're like me, your holiday shopping list is far from being complete. And if you need something a little different, well, I've got the perfect gift for the passionate sports fan in your life. Ice Shaker bottles are officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, NCAA, and MLB, and they make the ideal gift. Created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers, Ice Shakers have changed the game with workout bottles made of kitchen-grade stainless steel that won't absorb odor like plastic bottles. This is the gift that you've been looking for. Order your team branded bottles today at iceshaker.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get 25% off your order. Ice Shakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market. Ice Shakers. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina with Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, my special guest. And I will be on Ed's show as well, so do check that out. And also coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast tomorrow, we're going to do Crossover Thursday. Yep, we still have to do the Crossover Thursdays, even though the Giants season is basically done. Kevin Ostreicher will join me. We'll break down the Giants-Baltimore Ravens matchup. It's going to be ugly, Ed. I think it's just going to be an absolute, disaster. But hey, listen, that's why you show up on Sunday, because you never know, any given Sunday and all that good stuff, right? So.
Absolutely. But I agree.
All right. And let's talk about, we've been talking about the main problems of the New York Giants moving forward. What other thoughts do you have regarding what needs to change, whether it be coaching, whether it be a philosophy shift, whatever, we haven't discussed that you feel is not being talked about enough, but yet it has been an issue.
Well, it's funny because Tony Del Genio, one of my contributors at Big Blue View, and I talk about this quite a bit. And I think that one of the things you look at with Joe Schoen and with this regime so far is I don't necessarily have a problem like with the starting offensive line that they rolled out at the beginning of the year. I think sometimes you can question some of the back end roster decisions that they make, and I question. At this point, I question, whether Joe is a really good evaluator of offensive line talent. I question the idea, as I've said earlier, that they haven't put that many resources into the defensive line. I wonder if Joe valued enough the leadership that he let walk out the door. Again, talking about Joe in a vacuum, each one of these decisions, Barkley, Jones, McKinney, they're all defendable. They're all explainable. There's logic and analytics and all of that behind all of those decisions that you can defend. The problem is, these players aren't pieces of paper. They're not necessarily chess pieces. Sometimes you have to look beyond, he's a 27-year-old running back that, whatever, and he's had an injury history. Sometimes you have to factor in the person and what he means to the franchise. And I think that going forward, I would like to see Joe and the Giants, I would like to see them look beyond the analytics of their decision and spend more time considering the person. And as I say that, I'm thinking about, and I think he's going to leave, Patty. I think he's going to leave. But as I say that, I'm thinking about Darius Slayton, because Darius Slayton is the best guy, and he's the best locker room guy, and he's a good player, and he's been there for 6 years, and he's tired of it. He's exhausted, and I think he wants a fresh start somewhere else. But he's the type of guy who is still a good enough player that he could help that he can help the team. And just what he's been through for 6 years as part of this franchise, it would be helpful to still have a guy like that in the locker room. I think maybe that's a big thing that I think Joe needs to really think about, is not just the chess pieces, but the people.
I think that's well said. And I think you make a great point. For the bigger picture, obviously, I would also throw in, we talk about the quarterback. Definitely they need some cornerback help. They probably could use another receiver, some additional pieces here and there. But, to your point about the offensive line, that's why they brought in Chris Snee to help with that. I think Joe was smart enough to realize what he doesn't know and what has not worked out thus far. So, I give him credit for that. But, there's a lot of work to be done for this team moving forward. Ed, final question for you. I know it's like really super early, but given the changes that we're anticipating, the new quarterback coming in, possibly some new coaching staff members, Brandon Brown may leave, we don't know. I mean, realistically speaking, do you feel that the Giants can get out of this vicious cycle that they've been in for most of the last decade?
I do, Patty. I don't know how quickly, but everything turns eventually. And I keep thinking that it's going to turn for the Giants at some point. But look, if you get the right quarterback, and I don't know if the Giants can get the right quarterback in the 2025 NFL draft. Everybody talks about Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward and all of that, and where the Giants are going to be. They're probably going to be top 3 in the draft. They'll probably have a chance at least one of those guys, if not ending up with the number 1 pick and have their choice of what they want to do. And I won't blame them if they take a swing at one of those guys, but I can't guarantee that it won't work out either. You know, the thing that you would hope is if it's not going to work out, they don't wait 5.5 years to make that decision. And, you know, because we don't want to do that again. But Patty, if you get the right coach and the right quarterback, and I'm, you know, I toss the ball up in the air and you know, 1 minute I can make the argument that Brian Daboll should stay, and the next minute I can say, yeah, I can see why they would move on from him too. But if you get the right coach and the right quarterback, everything else can eventually fall into place. And, you know, I think I said at the top of the show, you can make the argument that with better quarterback play, the Giants would be somewhere around a 500 team this year, and we wouldn't be talking about any of this.
Yeah, I wish we weren't, but here we are. But anyway, Ed, great stuff as always. Want to thank you for coming on. Giant fans, thank you for tuning in, as always, to the Locked On Giants podcast. I know it's been a rough season, but I do appreciate you everydayers and my Blue Crew community members and everybody who comes through. So thank you for tuning in. Don't forget, tomorrow, Locked On crossover. Ravens, Giants, Kevin Ostreicher will be on with me. Don't forget to check out my appearance on Ed's show, Big Blue View Radio. So that'll be on tomorrow, I'm assuming. So we will see you tomorrow, Giant fans. Have a good one.